brief words about one of the epistle readings that we heard this morning from the Philippines, where St. Paul asks a whole series of questions about certain things in life, like are we not allowed to take a wife? Are we not allowed to eat and drink? Are we not allowed to do things and reap the benefits thereof, etc., etc. Many of the readings that we have in the church come from monastic sources, which concentrate very heavily upon the interior life, the hidden life of the heart, and how to purify it, because it's from the heart that stems all the other things, the unclean thoughts, the feelings, judgments, and all the secret sins that we carry with us, and we all carry them, whether we like it or not. This particular reading, however, is a bit different. I like to call it like a gospel of inspiration for those who are not monastics as such. Because what it says is that it's good to do those things, to take a spouse, to make things that reap the benefits of it, to have work and raise things, construct, etc., etc. Our spiritual father used to call this bringing forth fruit, and one of the main ways that he used this was in the missionary field by bringing forth publications and translations into English in particular, and sending them around the world for the inspiration of Christians, because it wasn't that very long ago where we did not have, particularly in English, the material that we have now of Orthodox life. It is also mentioned in that particular passage that, and in some of the sayings of the saints, that one who comes to church, lives a church life, should not live it sort of benignly, just to come and sort of sit there and or stand there or whatever and listen and whatever, but actually to participate in it actively. And that participation, of course, is not just here in the building, in the church, and we have a service, but in all the days of our lives. To be actively doing something, asking God's grace and help in that, and not being anxious about the fact that because we've done these things, we can't partake of them ourselves. We can, because that's what life is. We do certain things, we create, that's an important part. We inspire, and through this we get the rewards of our labours, which we are allowed to use, of course, with restraint, not loosely, as part of our way of bringing forth fruit and like glorifying the world. Although the world is perishing, the world is heading towards destruction, there is still an element of beauty which needs to be known and needs to be shown, particularly to children, so that they can discern themselves what is beauty and what is not, what is good and what is not. And if people don't do those sorts of things in their life, then where do the children begin to understand what is allowed and what's not allowed? How are they to live their life? How are they to set themselves up for their future? What sort of work will they do? How will they serve the church? You don't have to become an ordained person to serve the church. Certainly not. But there are numerous ways that you can glorify God by all these sorts of things that you do in your life. Of course, going overboard, as we just heard in this gospel reading about Martha and Mary, when Christ came to talk to them, Martha became very anxious and troubled because she wanted to make this big dinner. You know, the Lord's here and we love him. We're going to make this fantastic meal for them. And she came and complained that Mary was just sitting there listening to him. And the Lord said, well, Martha, you stop being so anxious, because Mary chose the best part. She came to hear that which is going to be important for her in her life and how she's going to live her life. The other things, we don't need, big time sort of restaurant meals and whatever every day in order to survive. But humble things is good enough. Food that nourishes and gives life is good enough, and not these delicatessen things which actually comes from philosophical idea of Epicureanism. There was a time when people made incredible meals and ate and ate and ate and ate, such a point that they vomited it up so they could go and eat and eat and eat and eat again, purely for the taste of the things. I mean, it was such an absurdity, but it happened. And even today, you'll find people that, maybe they don't go to that extent, but nevertheless, are always pushing forward the envelope of what they eat and how they behave in their life. That takes away your time for work upon yourself and also for the glory of the Lord. Because you must remember that whatever you do, whether it's seen or unseen, whether it's internal or external, has to be done for the glory of the Lord, for his thankfulness for all the sort of things that he has given us. Therefore, be careful in your own selves and don't be anxious that you use some of the things that you've created or made or something like that. But on the contrary, make sure that you busy yourself one way or another. Some people busy themselves with intellectual type work, like translating, writing Orthodox material or something like that, books. Others by building or making something, or doing work which can be of benefit to people in general. These are the sort of things that we are given in the Gospels so that people who are not monastics as such can have peace in their own heart. Monastics too, by the way, have to be fruitful. They can't just be sitting there doing nothing. On the contrary, it's a very difficult work, and people are usually under obedience to do all sorts of jobs in a monastery, on top of all the services, which are essentially 24/7. In a good monastery, the services never stop. Therefore, there has to be a sort of a schedule where some will do the service, then go away and work or rest, while others come in and continue on with those sorts of things. And thus, in our own life, on a smaller extent, we have the same situation. We rest, we say our prayers, we do these things, and then whatever we do for the glory of God. Walk as if God is there before you. That's what it means to have remembrance of God. Walk as if he's there before you. Don't do those things that you would be ashamed for him to see in your own life. But walk as if he's there beside you. And that in itself is a prayer. It's like the Jesus prayer. Lord Jesus Christ, Son of God, have mercy on me, the sinner. Asking the Lord to be successful in those things for his glory, not your own. And through that, we can not only inspire our own circle of people, but provide for the future generations. Because if we don't, who will? Who will do that? Right now, there's a very big war to do the opposite. And as you know yourself, the idea of pleasures of various type are right at the forefront of every activity that human beings are capable of. It always has to do with some sort of pleasure which is not pleasing to God. Our pleasure has to be in pleasing God. And through that, you will find peace in your own hearts. And all these anxieties and troubles that we come across in the world will evaporate. Like somebody said to me, you come up and there is like a deep, dark hole in front of you. Don't examine it. Don't examine it. Walk around and get your way. And that way you will escape many of those sort of troubling things that affect us and make us not only fruitless, but can even lead to us having sicknesses of various types on account of that fact. At the end of this service, we hope to have the service of unction. I'd like you to stay, if possible, particularly if you have any ailments, whether they are spiritual or physical. This service of unction is a very important part of our Orthodox life, and it's usually done by 7 priests. I asked some, I don't think any can turn up, so one priest can do it. But the most important thing is that you get the benefit of that by listening to those prayers and keeping the Lord's commandments, which is really what we are trying to do here, to make sure that you are set in such a way that you can keep the Lord's commandments and grow spiritually. May God help us, preserve us, protect us.